So okay, let's move on. Right, what's wrong with the TPPA? Isn't free trade good for the country, as nearly all of our politicians, business leaders, academics and media experts tell us? The first point to make is that, like all such agreements, it has very little to do with trade as you and I understand that word. All of that stuff has basically already been signed and sealed. As with all so-called free trade agreements, the TPPA comes with a major foreign investment component, an investment agreement embedded in it which will throw open what remains off limits in the New Zealand economy to the tender mercies of American transnational corporations working hand in glove with the US government. It also includes a financial services agreement which will commit the member nations to institutionalise the very same horrendous practices which caused the 2008 global financial crisis. So there's no resiling from that. They want to bed those things in. And yesterday there's no cinemas open in Christchurch at the moment, so I went to the movies yesterday here, and the film at the World Cinema Showcase at the Paramount that I went to see is a film called Client 9. And I recommend you all go and see Client 9. It's a very interesting documentary about a man called Elliot Spitzer, who was the Attorney General and Governor of New York State, and he earned the title of being the Sheriff of Wall Street, and he set out to actually bust the companies like Goldman Sachs, etc., 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 except he had an unfortunate predilection for expensive prostitutes, which they found out about, and so they got rid of him. And it was all about rise and downfall, but the actual companies he was after were the ones that shortly after his downfall led to the crash of global capitalism. And there was a couple of fascinating quotes in there. One, when his boys busted one of these shonky traders, they couldn't work out what the acronyms and the guy's email files worked out. There was one that said POS. And when they got into his index, it worked out as piece of shit. And this is what he was referring to, various trades and stocks, etc. So he was actually recommending these to clients and that, but POS in his own files, piece of shit. Right, and then there was also the Chief Executive Officer, CEO of AIG, American Insurance Group, the biggest insurance company on the face of the earth, which went spectacularly in a matter of days, a couple of years ago. And he developed a pathological hatred of this Spitzer. And he was quoted in the film as saying that as a result of what Spitzer had done to him, he personally was practically financially worthless, and then he said, I only had about 100 million left. There's the definition of practically worthless. His personal wealth dropped to a mere 100 million bucks. Sorry?
He was naked.
He was, yes. It's a fascinating movie, actually. It's well worth seeing. And the other one to see is the one that won the Oscar this year, which is called Inside Job, Charles Ferguson, which is actually on, I think, commercial releases in Palmerston North when I was there the other day. And that won the Oscar for the best documentary. And he was quoted in Time magazine when he got his Oscar as saying, not one of these Wall Street executives had gone to prison. So far, not one. Okay. The TPPA will also push up the price of medicines by potentially hundreds of millions of dollars a year by attacking Pharmac. Everyone here know what Pharmac is? The Americans want rid of it. There's no secret about that. They want Pharmac gone because they see it as being an impediment to American pharmaceutical drug companies being able to sell prescription drugs at the market prices, which is the American system. So if you get the TPPA, Pharmac will be gone. The minute you go to a chemist shop, you'll start paying the real price for drugs, which is markedly different to what the sort of subsidised price is. It will make access to digital recordings more expensive and copying more restricted, attack our GE and tobacco controls and food labelling and food and appliance safety standards, and weaken our controls on food imports where they might carry diseases. And the whole process is both secret and fundamentally undemocratic in the way in which it is being negotiated and then ratified by executive decree, meaning that MPs will not get a vote on the TPPA, not until after it has been signed or already been signed anyway, which is New Zealand's standard procedure on free trade agreements and treaties in general. So be very aware of that. This is not something that will be debated on the floor of the House. This is not something that will be the subject of submissions to a select committee. It's not a New Zealand law. It's a treaty between sovereign governments, right? There's nothing to stop the government saying, yes, we will debate it in Parliament, and yes, there will be submissions to a select committee. They don't have to, because it's not an act, not a bill. Or something. And there's no, unlike America, there's no ratification process. It doesn't have to, once a treaty is signed in the States, it actually has to go through Congress and the Senate till they approve it or can reject it, not here. I'll single out the very big and extremely important health sector for special mention here by way of example. Now, we've still got these to do. There's a flyer here called, this one here, TPPA alert, hands off our public health system, which I recommend you all read and tell as many people as possible about. That makes clear that the TPPA targets not only, try the next one, let's see how we go, where are we? Yep, that makes clear that TPPA targets not only Pharmac but also ACC and proposed restrictions on cigarette packaging and sales. It will also have effects in areas such as foreign ownership of aged care chains, which is what we're writing for as Alston, health and safety rules for products, and health qualifications. Now, these are real concerns, not hypothetical ones. These are not something that we've plucked out of the air and said if ABC happens, then X might happen further down the track. In March, i.e. last month, an international expert on intellectual property litigation gave evidence to a New Zealand Parliamentary Select Committee on behalf of his client, an alcohol transnational corporation. He warned that proposed changes to New Zealand's liquor laws that target RTDs, that's called ready-to-drinks, they're the pre-mixed alco pops, aimed at preloaded with booze, soft drinks, aimed at girls. I just had dinner with my host's daughter who said, oh yes, those things, yes, I know those. Any change to the laws that target RTDs would breach New Zealand's obligations under both the closer economic relationship with Australia and the World Trade Organization's agreement on technical barriers to trade, because the proposed changes would prejudicially target one form of alcohol over another by restricting named products. So the message from the booze barons to the New Zealand politicians was very clear. You muck around with our product and try to change the laws of your country to suit yourself, we will come down on you like a ton of bricks under existing free trade agreements, both with Australia and with the rest of the world, let alone any new one. The tobacco control implications alone are huge and equally real. Right now, Philip Morris, the giant tobacco transnational corporation, is taking legal action against the government of Uruguay in South America because of the latter's tobacco control measures. Although an American company, Philip Morris is registered in Switzerland for tax purposes and is using a Swiss-Uruguay free trade agreement as the legal basis for its action, which claims that Uruguay is expropriating the company's profits by imposing conditions on tobacco sales and discriminating against it. And within the last 10 days, I've seen the Australian Minister of Health on television saying that Australia will become the first country in the world to insist that all cigarettes be sold in plain packaging, no brand names on the packets. They'll be the first in the world to do it. And they'll have these graphic images of the revolting photos of eyes and teeth and tongues and all that sort of stuff there. And when I saw that on TV, and when I read the report in the Herald the next day, it said British American Tobacco Australia, which is BAT, is the biggest tobacco company in the world, said this. They will go, the Australian government, for billions under international trade agreements because of being deprived of their brand and their right, interfering with their intellectual property and their brand name, etc. So these are real concerns. So there's two examples. There's booze and smokes, which are very much hot issues in this country, and we change laws to sort of determine the way we govern our own country. These companies have said, we will come down on you with these existing acts and any new ones. This illustrates one other major danger of the TPPA. It includes what are called investor rights provisions, meaning that companies from the signatory countries can sue the governments of those countries if the companies feel that they are the victim of expropriation or discrimination. Now, to clarify, I'm not talking about the signatory governments taking legal action against each other, of the sort involved in New Zealand's attempts to get our apples into Australia, for example, but companies from one country suing the government, either at the local or central level of another signatory country. These cases are heard, not in New Zealand courts, for example, these cases are heard in secret by international tribunals and deliver rulings that are binding in international law. Now, there's nothing new about this. It is a model since the mid-1990s under the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, one which has resulted in numerous cases in which US corporations have so far been awarded a total of hundreds of millions of dollars, US dollars, in damages against local and central government in both Canada and Mexico. To give one example, the most notorious one, an American company called Metalclad was either processing or dumping toxic waste in a particular Mexican city or state, and the local government there said, no, you can't do that, that breaches our environmental laws. And so the American company said, you cannot discriminate against us, and took the government to court and was awarded $11.5 million damages. So this is what New Zealand will face under the TPPA. Now, first, and very recently, when asked about this by the news media, John Key denied that this was the case, describing it as, quote, a somewhat far-fetched scenario. But American negotiators, when this was put to them, bluntly stated that New Zealand has accepted investors' rights as part of the TPPA. So who do you choose to believe, the organ grinder or the monkey? Key has since said that New Zealand will have to swallow unprecedented demands from the Americans in order to get the TPPA concluded. Are you reassured? When Key said that we would have to swallow unprecedented demands, he specifically singled out Pharmac as being a, quote, unprecedented American demand. So when you've got the Prime Minister of New Zealand using words like having to swallow unprecedented demands and mentions Pharmac, then you can get the picture, right? And you know what's going on beneath the surface, below the tip of the iceberg. Okay, we can move on.